The sun was setting as the Johnson family moved into their new house. They were a happy family with 2 children, 10-year-old Timmy and 8-year-old Sarah. They were excited to start a new chapter in their lives and to make new friends in the neighborhood. Their new neighbors across the street were the Clarks. The Clarks were a tight-knit family with a son, Jason, who was the same age as Timmy. The Johnsons soon noticed strange things happening in their neighborhood. They would hear chanting and ritualistic music coming from the Clarks' house late at night. They assumed it was just a family that kept to themselves and tried not to think too much of it. However, they were alarmed when they saw Jason trying to talk to their kids, whispering about a special game he wanted to play with them. The Johnsons were wary of Jason's behavior but didn't want to jump to conclusions. They tried to keep their kids away from him, but Jason was persistent, always trying to convince Timmy and Sarah to play with him. The Johnsons noticed that Jason's parents seemed to encourage his behavior, always inviting their kids over to play and even offering to babysit them. One night, the Johnsons woke up to find their kids missing. They searched the entire neighborhood but couldn't find them. As they were frantically searching, they noticed that the Clarks' house had all its windows and doors closed, which was unusual. The Johnsons knocked on their neighbor's door, but there was no answer. The Johnsons called the police, and they arrived quickly. They searched the Clarks' house and found evidence of a ritualistic sacrifice in their basement. They found a circle of stones with symbols carved into them, and a knife covered in blood. The Johnsons were in shock. They couldn't believe that their neighbors were involved in something so sinister. The police told them that they had been monitoring the Clarks for some time and suspected that they were part of a cult that had been sacrificing children for years. The Johnsons' kids were found safe, locked in a room in the Clarks' basement. The Johnsons were relieved but also traumatized by what had happened. They moved out of their house soon after, unable to live in a neighborhood where something so terrible had happened. The investigation into the cult revealed that they had a sophisticated network that spanned across multiple states. They had a charismatic leader who had convinced his followers that the sacrifices were necessary to appease their God and that they were doing good by ridding the world of impure children. The Clarks' son Jason was the one who had lured the Johnsons' kids into the cult's clutches. He had been brainwashed by his parents and the cult's leader, and he believed that sacrificing children was the right thing to do. The Johnson story became well known in their community, and many families moved out of the neighborhood, unable to live in a place where such atrocities had taken place. The cult had been performing the ritualistic sacrifices for years, and no one had suspected a thing. The Johnsons were just one of many families that had been affected by their heinous acts. The Johnsons' tragedy had a profound impact on the community, and it served as a wake-up call for many. People started paying more attention to their neighbors and reporting any suspicious behavior to the authorities. The Johnsons' loss had led to a greater sense of community and vigilance, and it had helped prevent other families from experiencing the same fate. But for the Johnsons, the scars of their loss would never fully heal. They moved away from the neighborhood and tried to start a new life, but they would always be haunted by what happened to their children and the knowledge that they were living next door to a dangerous cult. The Johnsons' trauma and grief affected them deeply, and they sought therapy and support groups to help them cope. As the investigation into the cult continued, it became clear that the Clarks and their leader were responsible for many more deaths than anyone had initially suspected. The authorities were able to arrest several of the cult's members, but the leader was still at large. Months went by, and the Johnsons started to feel a sense of normalcy again. They had moved to a new neighborhood, and their kids had made new friends. But one day, they received a letter in the mail. It was from the cult's leader, who had somehow tracked them down. The letter was chilling. It contained threats against the Johnsons and their children, and it made it clear that the cult was still watching them. The Johnsons were terrified, but they knew they had to take action to protect their family. They contacted the police, but there was little they could do. The cult's leader was still at large, and there was no way of knowing when or where he would strike next. The Johnsons decided to take matters into their own hands. They spent months researching the cult and trying to track down the leader. Finally, they were able to locate him, living under an assumed name in a remote area of the country. The Johnsons knew that they had to act fast. They drove to the cult leader's house and broke in, armed with a gun. The leader was surprised to see them, but he didn't seem afraid. In fact, he seemed almost amused. The Johnsons demanded that he leave them alone and stop threatening their family. But the cult leader just laughed and told them that they would never be safe. He revealed that he had followers all over the country, and that they were still carrying out the cult's rituals, even though he was in hiding. The Johnsons were shocked and horrified by what they heard. They knew they had to stop the cult once and for all. They pointed the gun at the leader and told him to take them to the cult's main headquarters. The cult leader led them to a remote location in the woods, where the cult was performing another sacrifice. The Johnsons were filled with rage and terror as they watched the cult members preparing to kill another innocent child. Without hesitation, the Johnsons opened fire, killing the cult leader and several of his followers. They were able to rescue the child, who was traumatized but alive. The Johnsons knew that they had put themselves in danger by taking matters into their own hands, but they also knew that they had done the right thing. They had stopped the cult and prevented more innocent children from being sacrificed. The Johnsons returned home, exhausted and traumatized but also relieved that they had finally put an end to the cult's reign of terror. They knew that they would never forget what had happened, but they also knew that they had done everything in their power to protect their family and their community. As time passed, the Johnsons found peace in knowing that they had done the right thing. They moved on with their lives, but they would always remember the horrors they had witnessed and the sacrifices they had made to keep their family safe. They were a family forever changed by the evil they had faced, but they were also a family that had found strength and courage in the face of unimaginable adversity.